two distinctly different groups of ancestors, the ancestral helping spirits who've crossed successfully and the unresolved dead who are stuck here. Would you elaborate on the differences between them?
So in a healthy culture where there's a healthy relationship between the individuals and the community, when someone passes, their death would be tended, and that people who are skilled in that job would make sure that the person who just died literally made it. They don't just hand it over to God and hope and pray. Like, they literally make sure the person makes it to cross over. So that really hasn't been happening for a large group of people here on this planet for a couple thousand years. So this understanding that it's our job, the living, to escort the dead to where they need to go, and part of it is to make sure they clear out of the realm of the living, because their presence here is problematic for us and problematic for them. And if they get where they need to go and complete whatever happens there on the spirit side, which none of us know because we're not there yet and we don't remember having been there, they can turn around and essentially then come back to us as these true ancestral helping spirits. And this is what Indigenous people are speaking to when they speak to their ancestors. This assumption that the ancestors are a categorically good thing. If you're tending your dead, they are. We haven't been. Around the globe. I'm not, you know, everybody's equally guilty almost, except for those people that are still doing their Indigenous practices. And so the dead aren't being tended and deeply, and so they don't make it. There's a lot of unresolved issues in life, of the person hanging on to life unlived, emotions unexpressed, especially the really hard ones like grief and things that we have sort of social protocol about not feeling anymore. Mm-hmm. All of these things keep us unresolved in our life. The other issue is, of course, the living holding on to the dead. We don't know how to let go anymore and release them and trust that they'll come back to us as helping spirits. And so we hold on to them. So the everyday vernacular would be, we keep them ghosts, or they stay here as ghosts. So technically they're ghosts. But what this really means is that their energy is stuck in this in-between place. They're not here anymore because they don't have a body, but they're not there. They're not where they belong with the dead. And so consequently, whatever unresolved issues kept them here, kept them from crossing over, are still alive and trying to find life force and free will to be freed, to be released. You know, energy doesn't want to stay the stingy, miserly Uncle Bob, or the deeply dysfunctional, predatory Aunt Sue, or whoever. I mean, the energy that's being bound in that doesn't want to stay there. It wants to be released. It wants to get out through the free will, but it can't, because the person's dead now and it's stuck. And so it's in this very unconscious, very shadowy, very twisted way, moving down into the next generation to try to find that release. And so there's a lot of really powerful quotes from Indigenous people about how these unresolved dead are like these big bloated babies, sort of cannibalizing the life force of the living. And this is really, I mean, they're really clear how bad that situation is. And yet for us, it's normal. And where this manifests in our life is in our physical body, which we can talk about in a minute. But the point is, these ancestors that are not crossed over are not in any place at all to be an ancestral helping spirit. As I say to my students, just because someone's dead doesn't mean they get any smarter. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not a given. And so people get stuck. And that's what makes them this other group who are the unreconciled dead. And they need help. Spirit can't do it for us. God can't do it for us. We have to do this. And that's why my title, you know, we really can't wait anymore. Yeah.
Right, right. So, well, how do you suppose it happened that we've stopped doing this? If it used to be just a part of custom, mm-hmm. What happened?
Religion.
Okay.
This idea that we now just sit back here and pray and hand it over to God and God will take care of it. It's not God's job. Not that God is not awesome. God's awesome, not God's job, our job. And that's part of this real, acquired contemporary ignorance about what is the role of the people in this relationship and what is the role of spirit. And for me, as a shamanic practitioner, this has been this beautiful learning curve. I mean, I certainly started ignorant as well, but I feel like the helping spirits are constantly teaching us how to be in relationship with them. What is our role? What must we do? And to allow them to help, and then what can they do? And so it's a very important thing also in this ancestral healing topic, because we, the living, do need to do it, but we need to be able to reach out to ancestral helping spirits to work through us. And so there's also an aspect of this we can't do. And so it's, again, this very shamanic co-created relationship between the living and these true ancestral helping spirits. So that team can then address the unresolved ancestral helping spirits. The point being, though, there's nothing wrong with religion except the way it changed our funeral practices, and that we stopped, they sort of demonized the people who had the skills to work with the dead. I mean, there is that political piece too of misunderstanding that and making those roles less than and ultimately undesirable roles. Only the priest who's doing the sort of the praying and looking up versus the people that were really looking at the work to clean up here in the physical world. So that political thing happened all around the globe. All of our organized religions that dominate the world right now all did it to somebody. So I'm just saying, you know, in general, humanity has made this error. I'm not blaming anybody specifically. We're all in it together.
And it's up to all of us to clean it up.
Exactly.
Right. So now, my understanding from what you said is that the unreconciled dead can now hijack our lives to try to fix theirs. How does that work?
You know, this gets so depressing so fast. So I want to say one thing first. All of us have more true ancestral helping spirits than we have problematic ancestors. I know it doesn't really feel that way, but we do. The problem is the unresolved ones are kind of between us and the true ancestors. We've lost the knowing of how to reach out to the true ancestral helping spirits and begin to work with them. It's kind of like you have to jump over the trash heap, you know, instead of trying to get through it. Back to your question. What was your question again? Getting hijacked. Right,
exactly, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really depressing when you start thinking, okay, let me do the math. Humanity, most of humanity on Earth has not been crossing anyone over for a couple thousand years, and humanity all around the globe has been being really horrible to each other, right, for several thousand years. Okay, so there's all these reasons people haven't crossed over. It's not like we've been really good, so most everybody could do it themselves. And so there are all of these patterns that are at the root of these deeply embedded cultural racism, sexism, classism, you know, all of it, all of these things that are such a challenge right now on the planet are rooted in our unresolved ancestral issues. They are not rooted in our ancestors, because our most rooted ancestors are the helping spirits. They are rooted in our relationship right now with these unresolved ancestors. And so what happens is that energy that got bound up. So let's say I didn't live well, didn't die well, and have just passed on the unresolved issues I inherited in my life towards the next generation, did nothing to change anything. And then I die. So I'm mostly going to get caught in the trash heap, you know, in this mess of unresolved ancestors. And so that energy that could have transformed through me and didn't in my life when I was living is going to reach towards the next closest free will, which is that next generation. And so through the blood. And that's another thing. This isn't like magical shaman speak. It's in the blood. It is in the bloodlines. And so it's reaching through the bloodline to get freedom, to get the transformation that it needs. But it's so deeply unconscious, so shadowy, so much in our body. And we didn't make the mistake, so we don't even know what it is, right? And so it moves through us and starts to, in essence, hijack our life and influence our perspective about what is possible, our belief in ourself. Some people actually in my shamanic practice, I've found contemporary people hitting a certain developmental place growing up, having the ancestral pattern be in such frightening conflict with where their spirit's trying to go in that moment, like at 7 or 12 or whatever, that they actually experience soul loss from having slammed into this unresolved ancestral energy. I mean, it could be so thick and heavy and powerful, not just hijacking, a person's life, but a whole family's perspective. So a really simple example. Had a woman in my student community many years ago, and she was on the very first generations of antidepressants. She had this depression her whole life. She tried every antidepressant as it came out. She'd made her way up to the highest dose of every single one. None of them ever had any effect on her. Now this is serious chemistry. So the idea that it's not having an effect, none of them, is kind of a big deal. As she did this ancestral work, what she found is her ancestors had, because of, basic Irish famine and basically gloomy outlook on life, pretty much had developed the family belief that life sucks and then you die. I mean, it was really just this ancestral gloom, not depression, like the psychological diagnosis, but just this ancestral gloom. Life is awful. Good luck. It's going to be more awful. I mean, really. And
Wow.
she cleared all this ancestral stuff. And within a week, she started having these weird things happening because she was just still taking her meds at this really high dose. And now she didn't need it. There was no depression, so there's no reason to be taking the chemistry. And so she had to do this as quick as possible, sort of detox off those meds, because it couldn't work in her system anymore. Now, the important thing about shamanic healing is to realize I did not just say ancestral healing will fix your depression.
Right.
Okay. It will fix some people's depression if the root of your depression is really coming out of these ancestral beliefs. So, in other words, really clear example of unresolved ancestral energies hijacking someone's life in a way that was showing up in her chemistry, in her physical life. And that is one thing we need to acknowledge as we start to look at the greater and greater challenges we have with healthcare in the globe. I don't mean just the United States and paying for it. I mean, the weirdness of illnesses and happening at this time is many of these things are deeply rooted in this unresolved ancestral energy. So it hijacks us physically, it hijacks us emotionally in really shaping the what we feel is possible, what we feel we can express. When you have unresolved grief handed down through a family line, you get just the tiniest, like you lose your first kitten and you're like, bam, because there's this extra ancestral burden that's hijacking your own experience. And it can feel very curse-like, right? It's not necessarily, there are sometimes curses that need to be cleared in the ancestors, but it feels for us very curse-like. And so just to add one more step to that is, so I'm going through my everyday life. I experience a loss. We all experience loss. It starts out with your first, your goldfish, and then a kitten, and then, and then maybe a friend at school. This is happening for kids these days, right? And you would experience, hopefully, someone would support you in going through those emotions, and that ultimately things would happen in life that would buoy you back up again, and you would eventually come back to some normal, healthy equilibrium. But if you have all this burden of all this unexpressed ancestral grief, so kid dies in the classroom, this kid's best friend, they're grieving, and then this ancestral grief just takes them down even lower. So these things are happening in their life, trying to buoy them back up again. They're not even relating to them because they've been pushed down so hard into that grief by the ancestral grief. So life is trying to give you your life and buoy you back up again, help you come back to balance, and you miss it because you've been hijacked by this ancestral energy. It's hugely prevalent, which is frankly why most schools of healing or medicine are noticing it one way or another. Not everybody has the modalities to know exactly how to interpret it or know what to do with it, but it is getting noticed in a lot of realms of healing.
Thanks for listening. Check out Castle Gate, a novel based on my own ancestral healing journey, at lisabonese.com.
In 1921, 4 men set off from Scotland to the United States. Will Garrock, his brother Pete, his son Willie, and his nephew Thomas, all coal miners. They left behind the miners' rows and the nationwide mining strike with its soup kitchens. Their destination was Castlegate, Utah, where they had kin to welcome them before sending for their wives and children. They prospered in America, working in one of the finest mines in Utah. Until that tragic day, March 8th, 1924. Disaster struck. 3 explosions, trapping 171 men inside. Rescue crews worked tirelessly for days, but sadly, they could not save a soul. Women were widowed and children were orphaned, and some never recovered from their broken hearts. Castlegate is the true and tragic saga of a Scottish family whose dreams of finding their fortunes in the bountiful coal mines of Castlegate, Utah during the Prohibition era explode in one of the most devastating mine disasters in American history. Learn more at lisabunnies.com.